y'all. On today's video I'm going to walk you through the installation process of our front runner half rack for our JL. We chose this rack because it has a high load carrying capacity to support our rooftop tent. Instead of using the roof rails or any type of roof mount, it actually attaches through the roof to the sport bar, which provides a much stronger mounting point. The installation process was pretty straightforward, although a little bit lengthy. I did take my time and took some time to videotape it as well. The instructions were excellent. All of the provided hardware is very solid, very strong feeling. So I'm looking forward to taking you through the process. In order to access the mounting locations for the rear brackets, you're going to have to remove a factory trim piece, this little plastic piece here. It's pretty easy to get off. It pops right off. It's not going to be reused because it won't remount to that location. You can see on the back it's just got a couple of pressure clips to hold it in place. I used a panel tool to make it a little bit easier to get off. Just pushed it in right behind there and gave it a little twist, and it popped off pretty easily. As soon as you've got that off, you have access to the two locations where these rear brackets are going to bolt up. Unfortunately, I didn't think to start videotaping until after I had already drilled the small pilot holes in the top. So the video showing that part of the process was actually taken after the rack was completely installed. I'll try and point out all the areas in which you'll be working and the procedures that I use to get the pilot holes drilled. I still think it gives a pretty good idea of the process, and then we'll pick up the live action. The first step in getting this installed is drilling all the pilot holes through the top to attach the brackets to the exterior roof rack. The rear brackets that you can see here bolt to the sport bar using two existing bolt holes and the supplied hardware with the bracket. Basically, you'll go ahead and just bolt this bracket in place. Come up here and mark on the top with a pen, pencil, whatever, the location that you're going to drill your pilot holes. There is some adjustment built into the engineering for this top, so you don't have to be too concerned about getting those pilot holes exactly perfect. You want them pretty close, obviously, but if you're off by 1/8 of an inch or so, it's going to work out just fine. There's enough adjustment so that everything works just great. So next you'll go ahead and remove this bracket so that you've got room to work, and drill the pilot holes through the top. The instructions say to use a 4mm drill bit. I don't have a 4mm drill bit. Basically, I think you can use any size up to 1/4 of an inch drill bit, because that is the size bit that the pilot bit's going to be on the hole saw that you have to use to go ahead and enlarge those holes. So as long as you're close to or a little under a 1/4 inch bit, I think it's probably going to work out just fine. After you've finished the back brackets, the next step is to come and drill the pilot holes for the front brackets. These brackets attach very easily. There's just a single bolt that goes right through your sport bar into a captive nut in the bracket. Again, you're going to want to mark front and rear with a pen or a pencil the spot on your top where you're going to drill the pilot holes. You will want to make sure to get this lined up so that it's running parallel to the top and you get it in a nice straight line. You can use, there's an edge, it's hard to get the light quite right. You can see that edge there in the top. If you line up the edge of the bracket with that edge in the top, you'll end up with a nice straight line to drill your pilot holes. Again, as with the rear brackets, there is a little bit of play in the engineering, a little bit of adjustment, so that if you don't get those drilled exactly perfect, you can make just a little bit of adjustment when you're putting the rack on. I was a little uneasy about drilling holes in the top of my brand new Jeep, but we really wanted a rack that had a solid mount that could support a lot of weight, and this seemed like this was the best solution. So I got my 3/8 inch hole saw. I put down some blue painter's tape just to try and protect the area and make it chip as little as possible. And here we go. All right, well, here goes. Well, that was easy. We got 6 more of those to make. Alright, so here we go. Peel the tape off. The edges of the holes are not quite perfect, but they'll all be concealed by the foam gaskets. Okay, next up we have to mount these internal brackets to the sport bar. These are really nice, heavy, solid brackets. All the hardware in this kit is pretty impressive. Just for good measure, I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite blue on the bolts. It doesn't call for it, but it's not a bad idea. This is really great how it just bolts to existing holes in the bar. The fact that it passes the load straight through without putting any load on the top really makes me feel a lot more confident being able to put something heavy like a tent up on this rack. Snug those up for now, and I'll tighten them up completely after I've got the rail set up on the roof. Now it's just the same thing on the driver's side. Again, I'll go ahead and put a little bit of Loctite blue on here just for good measure. So far, everything is lined up very nicely. It's installation's been pretty straightforward. Of course, I'm not very far into it yet. And I'll just use the Allen wrench to snug these up. And the rear brackets are on. The front back brackets also mount right to the sport bar. I've got a little cage nut here. Just slides right in and rests on the roll bar. You've got a long bolt that uses an existing hole and runs right through. Again, it's a very nice design that's going to transfer all the load straight to the strongest point inside the vehicle here, instead of trying to use that flimsy fiberglass roof. A little bit of Loctite. This is a 13mm metric socket. I'll just go ahead and snug that up for now. Okay, we're back on the outside of the Jeep again, now with the bracket installed on the inside. You can see the bracket through the roof. Comes with a foam gasket. We've got a peel-off adhesive on the back. These are the aluminum spacers. The spacers will just drop in the hole. Foam gasket fits around them. Here's to the top of the vehicle. Because of the way this is built, it's a nice system that there is the bolt that goes through the center of this spacer does not take up the entire circumference of that area. So when you drilled, if you were off by 1/8 of an inch or so, like you can see, this hole is not perfectly centered. And it's not going to be a problem at all. Because of a little bit of extra room in that spacer, the bolt will go right through that hole and I won't have any problem with it. So again, that's a very nice engineering feature, because it is a bit of a challenge to try and get those holes drilled exactly perfect. Okay, I'll go ahead and get the spacers and the foam gaskets installed. I already went ahead and wipe the top down real well so that there's no oils or waxes or anything on there. Make sure that these foam pieces will stick nicely. And actually, I guess I don't need the bolt. Let me just slide that through, eyeball it, and push it down nice and tight. And just do that 6 more times. Okay, next up we'll be installing these side rails. It would be nice if they labeled these left and right for you, but they don't. So I'm guessing that the brand logo just goes forward. We'll set them up on top of those spacers. This is a point where it might be nice to have a second set of hands, because you've got to thread them through the top and put a nylock bolt on the bottom. So it's going to be kind of tricky, but I'll have to make do since I'm working by myself. Okay, now we're up on the roof with the side rail. It will just sit down on top of these aluminum spacers. Get them lined up. Got 4 bolts that have got a series of washers on them. We'll slide those through to the interior of the vehicle. I'm thinking that I can just maybe get a wrench onto these and use the side rail itself to just hold the wrench while I'm working down below. Those are 10mm bolt heads. Went ahead and just put that open-ended wrench on there. See if that'll stay in place for me while I go down below, and go ahead and put that nut on. So long arms will help you out a lot in this situation. Okay, you can see this is where the bolt comes through the bracket on the inside. There we go. First one's definitely the hardest to get started. Again, if you can sort of just balance that wrench up on top there, it can give you just enough assistance that you can snug this up without having a second set of hands. The first one nice and snug, the rack will stay in place pretty well, and it makes it easier to get the rest of them done. Again, just snug, don't tighten it. You still want to be able to move that rack. Just to get your final adjustments on each of the holes. Found this was a little bit easier on the driver's side because you don't have the tailgate door in your way. So maybe start with the driver's side to get a feel for it, and then once you're up for a challenge, move over to the passenger side. That'll have to do for now. The fronts on the passenger side seem like they're a little bit easier to deal with. Again, mainly because you don't have that tailgate door blocking your access. Same kind of thing, you can just thread these nuts on while you reach over the top of the vehicle and secure the top of the bolt so it doesn't push up out of that hole. 10mm wrench, 10mm socket. Okay, both of the side rails are installed. Just another quick note on these rear mounting brackets. You can see the holes have 3 different mounting points you can choose based on what works best with your situation. I had originally mounted them in the center, but I went ahead and moved to the very top adjustment in those brackets because it just made the fit better with my particular roof. I'm guessing that there might be some slight variations in fitment from the factory, and that's why they give you the option. So now it's time to assemble the roof rack portion that's going to sit on top of those side rails. I've got it laid out on the garage floor here. The instructions are included in the box with the side rails and are pretty comprehensive. Actually, all the instructions for this whole kit have been pretty good so far, which is unusual in this day and age. I've also taken just a moment to go ahead and separate all of the hardware. I find that makes it a lot easier once you get going, just so that you know exactly what you've got, what you're going to need for the next step, and you can easily grab it so you're not having to search around to make sure that you've got the right nuts, bolts, and washers. So let's get set up and put this roof rack together. Okay, I went ahead and laid out a moving blanket on the floor just to make this a little easier not to get it scratched up. With the hardware is included a 5mm Allen wrench. I think it'll make life a lot easier if you happen to have one for your ratchet, instead of having to deal with this little crummy wrench. Start at the corner. It just slips into the channel at the top. There we go. Take your bolt, put it right in there. Get it started. Start to grab on that bolt. Don't tighten it down yet. You always want to leave everything loose until you've got all the slats installed. And we're just going to work in order down the rack with all these slats. You can go every other hole. Again, the fact that they're including nylock nuts for this is a nice, helpful feature. That way you don't have to worry about this ever slipping out of place. The nuts are captive inside these cross rails, which is also nice, makes it a lot easier to work with. Finish off with the other end cap on this side. And we'll just repeat the process with the other side rail. I think it's probably easiest to get all of the crossbars on this side lined up before you start screwing anything into place. It's probably a good choice to wait to do this until fall here in Arizona. It's only in the low hundreds. It's almost tolerable to work in the garage. Once we've got all the bolts started, everything's squared up, go ahead and tighten them all down. The suggested torque rating on these is 15 foot-pounds. I'm just going to give them a nice good hand tightening. I don't think I'm going to break out the torque wrench. Again, those nylock nuts are going to make sure that these don't back off on us. Definitely not sure how you're going to come to the conclusion of setting these to 15 foot-pounds with the little included Allen wrench that they give you. I'm thinking you just tighten them down pretty snug and you're going to be fine. Okay, so now that the tray is assembled here, it's time to go ahead and put the corner brackets on. These corner brackets, they're held on with these small 4 bolts. These do not have any type of nylock bolt or anything like that. So again, I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of Loctite glue on these just as a precaution to hold them in place better. In order to get started on this, we've got to turn this rack over so that it's right side up. And these do come with a supplied Allen wrench. I don't need the ratchet for this. These are pretty easy to get started. A little dab of Loctite glue on the bolts. Probably time to get another tube of that. It seems to be running pretty low. Take our corner bracket, get it lined up. Slide it on. And bolt that in. Lines up perfect, very nice fit. So far everything about this kit has been excellent fit and finish. I'll go ahead and just repeat that process at the other 3 corners. See, I just kind of hold it in place to make sure that it stays nicely aligned while I tighten that bolt down. Also makes it a little bit easier just to put your foot under the edge so that you've got room to work. Okay, in order to install the wind deflectors, we're going to have to flip this back so that it's upside down again. Each of these slats has got a rail in it. That'll allow us to slip this nut down into the rail. We're going to keep the washer up out of the rail. Get those in the center. That's going to give us a attaching point for the center wind deflector. Got 2 more of those that we're going to put on the outsides of each. These will probably be a little bit trickier because we're going to have to take the bolt out of the nut once we get the wind deflectors lined up the way that we want them. Hopefully it won't be too challenging to get them threaded back in there. Try and get this centered as best I can. I've got about 7 3/4 inches on either side. Like these are M5s again, so I can use my ratchet. Let's go ahead and snug these up a little bit. I'll pull these out. Slide that nut into the proper position. Drop it down in there. Piece of cake, that was great. Thing over here. Use that little Allen wrench that they supply to get that hole lined up. Slide that in there and snug it up. Now that I've got all these lined up, I think I will go ahead and again hit them with the Loctite. There's a lot of vibrations off-roading in a Jeep, and you don't want to lose one of these bolts. This is just Loctite glue, so it is removable. They say that after a test drive, if you find the wind noise is too unbearable, that you can always loosen these up, spread them out, and put about a 20-30 millimeter gap in between, and that should actually help to quiet it down. I'm going to start with them pressed together like they say, and we'll see what happens. Go ahead and snug those all up. Not going crazy tight, just nice and snug. Now for sure, the last step is to mount this up on top of the vehicle. I think a second set of hands is going to probably be pretty helpful. So let's see if I can talk Carrie into helping out with this part. Okay, so we've got the rack completely assembled. Next job is to get it up on top of the Jeep on the side rails. You're probably going to want to recruit some assistance for this. If your
short, but you know.
If your assistance is somewhat vertically challenged, you might want to find some sort of a makeshift step to work with. This used to be a dead lifting platform. Now it's just going to be standing next to the Jeep platform. So let's see if we can get this put up on top. Okay, I'll apologize in advance for the terrible lighting, but the sun's setting and it's blowing us up in the garage here. We're going to try and keep Carrie out of the sun as much as possible. So let's get this loaded up and on the roof. Try and give you as much on your side to play with as I can. You can set it down if you need to.
Right. Not quite. Almost. Okay, here. Okay.
look under the rack. Each one of these rails has got a little hole that will allow you to insert one of the supplied bolts in there. You got to get it turned so that it lines up, and it will just slide into that channel. Once you've got them all in that channel, you'll just get the washer and nut, get the bolt lined up with this hole here, and tighten everything down. You've got to repeat that 12 times. Once again, you've got to get the rack centered up on the Jeep. Should be pretty easy now that we've got it up there. We'll just get everything tightened down and this job will be done. Okay, quick tip I wish I'd have known. The wind deflector here, once you've got it completely mounted up, covers up the access point for sliding the bolt into that front channel. So I'm going to have to go ahead and loosen that up, remove it, slide it around a little bit so that I can get the bolt in. What you'll probably want to do is actually go ahead and slide your bolts into that channel prior to installing the wind deflector on the ground. Actually, it would probably be easier to go ahead and just slide all of these bolts into the channels on the ground while you've got easy access to the bottom of the rack. I think that's probably the way to go. But you live, you learn. It would have been nice if they made mention of that in the instructions someplace, but it's not a major issue. We'll get it fixed. Okay, so the rack is finally finished. I think it turned out pretty good. The installation wasn't too challenging. It was time consuming, but the instructions were good. The engineering on this product seems excellent. It looks great. It is absolutely rock solid. No movement on the vehicle whatsoever. Feels like it'll hold up very well. If I have any concerns, my only single concern would be these foam gaskets that they give you. I don't know that those are going to provide a very good water seal. Fortunately for us, that's not a huge problem being in Arizona. Rainfall is not a big issue. I do think that I'm going to pull that back apart though and go ahead and use a little bit of mastic around the aluminum spacers in between that foam gasket to just give me a really good watertight seal so that I don't ever have to worry about it. Otherwise, I think I give this rack an A+, and I'll update you after we've had the chance to use it a little bit. I hope this video gave you a pretty good idea of what it takes to get this rack installed on a Jeep. It wasn't always easy to get the camera in the tight spots to show close-up detail, but I hope that some of the tricks that I showed you will make it a little bit easier for you to get this installed. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.